Your hand is resting on a stone. It is taller than you are, wider than your shoulders, and carved into its limestone face, in a low, careful relief that someone shaped with a chip of flint, is a fox, mouth open, tail raised, frozen mid-leap for 11,500 years. Whoever carved it had no metal, no pottery, no writing, no wheel, no farms, no word for a city, because no city existed anywhere on Earth. And yet they moved this stone here, stood it upright, and carved a fox onto it. You are standing on a hill in southeastern Turkey, about 15 kilometers northeast of the city of Sanliurfa. The locals have always called it Gobekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill. For most of living memory, it was a place where farmers cursed the broken slabs of rock that kept blunting their plows. Underneath those slabs is the oldest monumental architecture ever found. Not the oldest in Turkey, the oldest anywhere. So here is the mystery. Everything you were ever taught about how civilization begins runs in one direction. First, people learn to farm. Farming makes surplus. Surplus makes villages. Villages make cities. Cities make kings and priests, and eventually the spare labor to raise something enormous out of stone for a god. Farm, then temple. That is the order. That is the story in every textbook. Gobekli Tepe is a temple built by people who had not yet invented the farm. But the truth is stranger than the legend, because the more the site is excavated, the more it stops looking like a simple reversal of the story, and starts looking like something the story never had a category for at all. So what were these people actually doing up here? To understand it, you have to put yourself in their world. It is roughly 9,600 years before the Common Era. The last ice age has just ended, only a century or two ago, in a hard cold snap that climate scientists call the Younger Dryas. The world is thawing. Where you are standing is not desert. It is open parkland, oak and pistachio and wild grasses, cut by seasonal streams, moving with gazelle. There are maybe a few million human beings alive on the entire planet. Every single one of them is a hunter and a gatherer. Nobody sows a field. Nobody herds a flock. Nobody stores grain against next winter, because there is no next winter thinking of that kind yet. Your people follow the gazelle. You know which slope gives wild einkorn wheat in which week, and you strip the seed heads by hand. You know where the almonds are. You carry what you own, and you own what you can carry. And then, somehow, thousands of you agree to spend generations dragging 10-ton blocks of limestone up a hill. How do people with no chiefs, no writing, no wages, and no bread persuade each other to do that? Nobody found the question until 1994, and the reason is almost painful. In 1963, a joint survey team from Istanbul University and the University of Chicago walked this hill as part of a broad regional reconnaissance. The surveyor, Peter Benedict, wrote up what he saw: broken limestone slabs on the surface, scattered stone tools. The team concluded the slabs were probably gravestones from a medieval or Byzantine cemetery. Not interesting. They moved on. Those slabs were the tops of the pillars. For 31 years, the oldest temple in the world sat under a survey report in a filing cabinet. What changed was one archaeologist reading old paperwork carefully. Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute had spent years digging at a nearby site called Nevelli Kori under Harald Hauptmann, a site now drowned beneath the reservoir of the Ataturk Dam. At Nevelli Kori, Schmidt had seen strange T-shaped pillars set into the walls of a small ancient building. Almost nobody else in the world would have recognized what Benedict's boring gravestones actually were. Schmidt walked Göbekli Tepe in 1994. He later said he understood within minutes that he had two choices: leave and say nothing, or spend the rest of his life digging here. He chose the second. He dug here until he died in 2014. So what did he find? Circles. Great oval enclosures of standing stone, ringed by a low wall with T-shaped pillars set into it like teeth. And in the middle of each circle, two more pillars, larger than all the rest, standing parallel and facing each other. The best preserved is called Enclosure D. Its two central pillars stand about 5.5 meters tall and weigh somewhere around 8 to 10 tons each. And they are not abstract shapes. Look closely and you can see arms carved down the sides, bending at the elbow, hands with long thin fingers meeting over the belly, a belt around the waist with a buckle and pattern. Beneath the belt, hanging down, the pelt of a fox worn as a loincloth. They are bodies. Enormous, faceless, deliberately faceless stone bodies standing in a ring with their backs to the wall and their attention on each other. You are not looking at architecture. You are looking at a gathering, turned to stone, and carved across their flanks is a menagerie. Snakes pouring down in columns, wild boar with bared tusks, cranes with bent human-looking knees, scorpions, spiders, aurochs, the huge wild cattle that once ranged across Europe and Asia, vultures with their wings spread wide. Here is the detail that should stop you. The animals in the carvings are not the animals these people ate. The bone waste dug out of Göbekli Tepe is dominated by gazelle. Gazelle is almost absent from the art, so this is not a hunting record. This is not a menu on a wall. Whatever these carvings are, they are not about dinner. How do you know how old any of it is? Radiocarbon dating. Every living thing absorbs a slightly radioactive form of carbon while it is alive and stops when it dies. That carbon decays at a known rate, so measuring how much is left tells you how long ago the thing died. Charcoal, bone, and organic material trapped in the wall plaster of the enclosures all give the same answer. The oldest layer, the great round enclosures, dates to roughly 9,600 to 8,800 before the Common Era. The layer above it, made of smaller rectangular rooms with smaller pillars, runs from about 8,800 to 8,000. Put that in perspective, when the first stones went up here, Stonehenge was 6,000 years in the future. The Great Pyramid was 7,000 years in the future. The whole of recorded history, every name you have ever learned, fits into the gap between this hill and you, twice over. And the effort was staggering. Walk a few hundred meters from the enclosures and you reach the quarry. Cut straight into the limestone bedrock of the plateau. One pillar is still lying there, never finished, never lifted. It is about 7 meters long. Estimates put it near 50 tons. They cut it out of the ground with flint tools and stone hammers, and something stopped them before they could raise it. Now, the twist. If you are going to gather hundreds of people on a hilltop for weeks at a time to haul stone, you have to feed them. And the excavation team found how. Oliver Dietrich, Jens Notroff, and colleagues at the German Archaeological Institute published work on a set of large carved limestone vats found at the site, the biggest holding around 160 liters. Chemical residue inside them showed oxalate, a compound that forms when cereal is soaked, mashed, and fermented. Beer, or something close enough to it. Not casual drinking, industrial-scale feasting. And that is where the story turns, because of a mountain you can see from the site. 30 kilometers away rises Karahan, an old volcanic massif. In 1997, the geneticist Manfred Huhn and his colleagues published a study in the journal Science, comparing the DNA of domesticated einkorn wheat with wild einkorn populations across the region, looking for the closest living relative of the wheat farmers grow. They found it on the slopes of Karahan. The wild ancestor of one of the first domesticated crops on Earth grows on a mountain within sight of the oldest temple on Earth. Klaus Schmidt looked at that and made the argument that made the site famous. If people were gathering here in large numbers, they needed food, reliably, at a predictable place and time. The pressure to feed a crowd is the pressure that turns careful gathering into deliberate sowing. Which means the temple did not come after the farm, the temple may have caused it. Or as Schmidt put it, first came the temple, then the city. It is a beautiful idea. And here is where the channel has to be honest with you, because the people digging Gobekli Tepe today have spent the last decade complicating it. Schmidt described the site as a sanctuary in an empty landscape, visited by wandering hunters, with nobody living there at all. Later excavation, led by Lee Clare and the current team, has found cisterns cut into the bedrock to catch rainwater, buildings that look domestic rather than ceremonial, and grinding stones by the thousand. That does not look like an empty hill. That looks like a place where people lived, at least for large parts of the year. Schmidt also believed the enclosures had been deliberately buried, backfilled by hand, as a kind of ritual burial of the buildings themselves. Current work suggests a great deal of that fill arrived through ordinary slope erosion and later building activity instead. So the sharpest version of the story is genuinely contested among the people who know the site best. Not the age, not the pillars, not the fact that hunter-gatherers built something monumental before agriculture existed. Those are solid. What is debated is exactly what kind of place this was, and how directly it drove the birth of farming. And it is worth saying plainly that the site attracts claims it cannot support. One widely shared theory reads the carvings on a pillar known as the Vulture Stone as a coded record of a comet impact. The excavation team has published detailed rebuttals of it. When someone tells you this hill was built by a lost super-civilization or visitors from elsewhere, understand what they are really saying, which is that they cannot believe hunter-gatherers were this capable. The evidence says they were. There is also more here than one hill. Less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar, which bounces radio waves into the soil to map buried structures without digging, suggests 15 to 20 more enclosures still sitting in the dark. And since 2019, work under Necmi Karul of Istanbul University at nearby Karahan Tepe has revealed a chamber where pillars were carved directly out of the living bedrock, watched over by a human head emerging from the rock wall. It is one of a whole cluster of sites now being excavated across the region, known collectively as the Stone Hills. This was never one temple. It was a landscape of them. So what happened? Slowly, the circles stopped. After around 8,800 before the Common Era, the great enclosures are no longer built. What replaces them is smaller, plainer, rectangular. The pillars shrink. The carving thins out. By roughly 8,000, the site falls silent altogether, and the reason may be the most human thing in this entire story. By then, the farm had arrived. People in this region were growing their grain and keeping their animals. They no longer needed to gather from 100 kilometers around to hunt and feast and build together, because they now lived permanently beside their fields, in villages, with granaries and property and neighbors. The thing that Göbekli Tepe existed to do, bringing scattered people together, was no longer necessary. The world it helped create had no use for it. Sediment washed down the slope, grass grew over the pillars, and it vanished so completely that not one myth, not one legend, not one line in any ancient text anywhere remembers it. Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, Rome all rose and fell without ever knowing this hill existed. It was lost for 10,000 years, and no one ever knew to look for it. Now think about your own week. Somewhere in it, you ate bread, or pasta, or cereal, or a sandwich, or a beer after work. The wheat in it descends through an unbroken line of seeds and hands from wild grasses on a volcanic mountain you can see from this hilltop. But there is something larger you inherited here than wheat. Look at what your own civilization builds when it wants to be more than a collection of strangers. Cathedrals, stadiums, capitol domes, structures that cost far more than they return, that no economist would ever approve, that exist because a group of people needed a physical place to become a we. That instinct is not a product of civilization, it is older than the plow. It may be the thing that made civilization possible in the first place. And it starts here, with people who owned nothing but what they could carry, choosing to spend their lives raising stones. So put your hand back on the pillar. The fox is still leaping. It has been leaping since before wheat was tame, before a wheel had turned, before a single word had ever been written down. Someone carved it with a piece of flint, on a hill where the world was quietly being reinvented. And they had no idea that everything you are was on the other side of it.